am Evelyn Carter, and I never imagined I would be standing on my own front lawn. Rain soaking my coat, my suitcase at my feet, feeling more invisible than I ever thought possible. My son, Andrew, had passed away just days ago, and the silence of the house was sharp, brittle, as if it were holding its breath. I remember her words, Bianca's words, cutting through the quiet, leaving me with nothing but cold finality. She had made it clear I was no longer welcome. It was her home now, her kingdom to claim, and I, the woman who had raised Andrew, had no place in it. I didn't argue. I had learned a long time ago that sometimes silence speaks louder than protest. I stood in the drizzle, staring at every stone, every beam, every corner that had been chosen with care. A home Andrew and I had built together. The thought of losing all of it, not just the house, but the memories embedded in it, made my chest tighten. I couldn't let myself cry yet. Not here. Not in front of someone so determined to erase my presence. I replayed the moments from the funeral, the soft hymns, the flowers, the polite condolences, and how quickly they shifted to reality. Cold and unyielding. I thought about Andrew's words late one night, just weeks before he passed, when he had looked at me with his steady, knowing eyes, telling me to trust the system he had built. At the time, I hadn't fully understood, but now, standing in the rain, those words echoed in my mind. Perhaps there was more to his planning than I realized. The taxi ride away from the suburbs felt surreal. Polished lawns gave way to strip malls and industrial yards, and the familiar streets of my neighborhood blurred into a landscape that no longer felt mine. The motel I chose was unremarkable, a neutral place to hide, to breathe, to think. Its faded carpet and stale smell became strangely comforting. For the first time in days, I allowed myself to feel the depth of my isolation. But along with the loneliness came a glimmer of resolve. I reminded myself of Andrew's wisdom, the patience he had always modeled, and the idea that even in loss, there might be unseen layers of protection he had left for me. I spent hours quietly in that room, letting the rain's rhythm calm my racing thoughts. I thought about all the late nights spent with Andrew, labeling cables, sorting through his messy workspace, helping him chase dreams I barely understood. And suddenly, I realized something. This wasn't just a house. It was part of a larger puzzle Andrew had built, and perhaps Bianca's arrogance would be the very thing that set the next piece in motion. As I lay out my suitcase on the motel bed, I felt a quiet determination settling over me. This was only the beginning. What seemed like the end might actually be the first step in a plan I had yet to discover. I had lost a son. Yes, but maybe, just maybe, I hadn't lost everything. The rain tapped on the window, steady and insistent, and I whispered to myself that it was time to trust, as Andrew had told me, even when everything seemed lost. Soon, I would need to act, but first, I needed clarity, patience, and the courage to watch the pieces fall exactly where they were meant to. And that was when I realized this story was far from over. I remember Andrew as a boy whose curiosity could fill a room, while other kids were outside playing baseball or riding bikes. He would be in our basement, tinkering with old computers, stacking cables, and writing lines of code that made no sense to me at first. I would sit beside him, labeling his boxes of parts like they were library books, and I understood that these weren't just machines. These were pieces of his imagination, his determination, the start of a future he was quietly building. I spent my days as a school librarian, surrounded by the hush of children reading and the scent of old pages, thinking my life was ordinary. But Andrew made it extraordinary. I remember brewing coffee late at night while he pored over designs and business plans, teaching himself things I couldn't have imagined. I didn't always understand the complexity of his ideas, but I understood him, and I understood that every late night, every small risk he took, was a piece of something bigger. By the time he turned 20, Andrew had launched a small startup, starting from nothing more than determination and 2 refurbished servers. I would watch him pace the kitchen floor, rehearsing presentations, worrying about investors, and dreaming aloud. I remember feeling proud, but also helpless in the way only a parent can. I had pushed my savings into his ventures, not because I expected anything in return, but because I trusted him completely. I believed in his vision, and I believed in him. We had our rituals, our quiet moments that now feel sacred. I remember sitting beside him as he explained complex coding problems in ways only he could, tracing solutions on scraps of paper. I would offer simple encouragement, sometimes just holding his hand when the frustration was too much. These moments weren't about business, they were about love, trust, and partnership between a mother and her son. It was Andrew who often reminded me that success required patience and careful planning. He always said that a strong system would protect itself, that foresight was as important as effort. I had no idea, back then, that these words would become the foundation for the most important test of my life, one that would come after he was gone. When the house and everything we had worked for seemed to slip out of my hands, even in the quiet of our home, filled with his computers and the smell of old books, I could feel his presence in every detail. Every careful label, every polished surface, every book he left annotated in the library was a reminder that Andrew thought about the future, our future, even when he was still just a boy with bright ideas and a wide-eyed curiosity. And now, standing outside the home that had been ours, I realized that all those lessons, all that trust, might not have been just for his life. Perhaps he had been preparing me for a challenge I hadn't yet understood, a test that would reveal not just who I was, but who could survive and thrive when everything familiar was taken away. And as I settled into that small motel room, the memory of those nights spent with Andrew reminded me that this story was far from over and that I still had a role to play. After Andrew's funeral, the house felt empty in a way that made my chest ache. It wasn't the gentle quiet of mourning. It was brittle, sharp, the kind that seems ready to snap at any wrong move. Bianca moved through the rooms with the air of someone inspecting property, not grieving alongside me. She didn't pause, didn't acknowledge the memories embedded in the walls. Each photograph, each book, each carefully chosen piece of furniture felt suddenly alien, as if I were a ghost wandering through my own life. I tried to make sense of her calm control. She wasn't dressed in mourning colors. Instead, her cream suit, perfectly styled hair, and sharp nails screamed business as usual. I could feel a knot of anger forming in my chest, but I didn't let it show. I reminded myself that Andrew had always believed in thinking ahead, that sometimes the quietest observers held the most power. The will reading was another blow, the legal words falling like heavy stones. Everything Andrew's company shares, his accounts, the house, even the art was left to Bianca. My name appeared only once, in a brief note of gratitude. It hurt in a way that was different from grief. It was the sting of invisibility, of being reduced to a footnote in the life of someone I had raised and nurtured. Yet beneath that hurt, a small ember of curiosity sparked. Andrew had always been clever. He had always thought 3 steps ahead. Could it be that this, too, was part of his plan, returning to the house after the reading? I watched Bianca begin her work of erasing the past. She declared that the library books could be sold, that the oak floors were outdated, that the gym equipment was intrusive. I felt a pang of helplessness, seeing Andrew's sanctuary being dismantled in front of me. Yet I also remembered the evenings spent teaching him, guiding him, quietly investing in his vision. Perhaps there were still hidden protections I didn't yet understand. 2 days later, when the movers arrived and her intentions became reality, I didn't fight. I packed what I could into my suitcase, keeping my movements steady, my mind focused. As I locked the door behind me, leaving the house and its memories, a strange sense of calm settled over me. The humiliation, the cruelty, even the sense of erasure, it all became a backdrop against which I could think, reflect, and plan. In the quiet of my motel room that evening, I considered Andrew's repeated words about trust and systems. I remembered the late-night conversations in his cluttered office, the way he had always built contingencies, safeguards, layers that weren't immediately visible. I realized that what Bianca didn't know could be my advantage. Every act of her arrogance, every step she took assuming victory, might be exactly what triggered the next phase of Andrew's design. I allowed myself to imagine a scenario where her greed could work against her, where patience and strategy might restore what had been taken from me not through confrontation or anger, but through the meticulous architecture Andrew had built in life and death. My grief remained, but alongside it grew something stronger, a cautious hope. And in that hope, I found clarity. This wasn't the end. It was the turning point, the moment before action, the quiet before the storm. The next steps would require patience, observation, and faith in Andrew's foresight. As I set down my suitcase on the motel bed and looked out at the rain-slicked streets, I understood that Bianca's confidence was a trap of her own making, and that soon, her first mistake would set everything in motion. It was time to discover the hidden plan Andrew had left behind, a plan that might change everything. It was late in the evening when I finally picked up the phone and called Andrew's lawyer. My hands trembled slightly, though I told myself it was from fatigue, from too many sleepless nights. As the conversation began, I realized how much I had underestimated the quiet genius of my son. The lawyer spoke with calm precision, explaining that what Bianca had thought was total control was actually just the first layer of a much larger design. Andrew had built contingencies into his will, legal safeguards that I hadn't fully appreciated until now. I listened carefully as the lawyer described the fiduciary duty Bianca was bound to uphold for 30 days, a responsibility she had completely ignored. By expelling me from the house, by dismissing me with arrogance, she had triggered the very clause that allowed the next phase of Andrew's instructions to unfold. I felt a mixture of shock and relief. The house, the accounts, the fortune, it hadn't vanished. It had simply been waiting for the right moment to reveal its purpose, to reward patience over greed. As I sat in my modest motel room, I could almost see Andrew across the table from me, explaining how every careful plan, every small detail, mattered. He had always been meticulous, thoughtful, planning for contingencies most people wouldn't even consider. And now, even in death, he was guiding me, asking me to trust the system he had built. I realized that my role was to step back, to remain invisible, to let the structure work quietly and deliberately. My grief, my sense of loss, had to coexist with this new responsibility to be patient, to observe, to act only when the time was right. I spent hours thinking about the implications. Every credit card, every bank account, every investment Andrew had touched was protected in ways Bianca couldn't immediately override. I pictured her confident stride through the house, oblivious to the invisible walls Andrew had erected. Every impulsive action she took, every reckless choice, was slowly building her own undoing. I could almost feel the rhythm of his plan, the way it would fold around her greed and arrogance until the moment came when it could no longer be ignored. It was strange, sitting there in that dim room, realizing that the humiliation I had felt, the fear of being erased, was part of a larger design meant to teach a lesson not only to Bianca, but to me as well. Andrew had entrusted me with the final act, but only if I could remain steady, only if I could resist the urge to intervene prematurely. I remembered the nights we had spent together in that same house, the lessons he had given me about foresight and trust. And it all made sense now. He had planned for every eventuality, and I had to honor that. A quiet sense of power began to replace the helplessness I had felt. I wasn't powerless. I was part of something much bigger than a single house or a bank account. Every procedural hold, every legal measure that Andrew had put in place, was a brick in a wall that Bianca could see, but not breach. The realization filled me with cautious hope. This was justice, but it wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was precise, deliberate, and invisible until the moment it became undeniable. As I set my hands on the motel desk, I realized that the next days would require patience, observation, and a deep trust in Andrew's foresight. I needed to remain unseen, to allow his system to activate fully, and to watch as the very arrogance that had seemed so threatening now became the key to its undoing. I finally understood that Andrew had never left me unprotected. He had given me a shield disguised as absence, and now it was time to see it in motion. I watched Bianca step fully into the life she thought she had claimed, unaware of the invisible boundaries Andrew had built around her. She moved through the house like a queen inspecting her domain, issuing orders, redesigning rooms, and spending freely as if the fortune were limitless. Every impulsive choice she made, every car, every piece of furniture, every extravagant detail was precisely what would expose her to the consequences she couldn't yet see. Even as her confidence swelled, I stayed in the shadows, silently observing. The irony was almost comforting. Her assumption that I had been erased, that she could act without restraint, was exactly what made the system work. The bank declines, the legal injunctions, the stalled payments, all of it unfolded quietly but unmistakably. Each setback chipped away at her control, eroding the certainty she carried so arrogantly. I could picture her frustration growing with each obstacle. The red sports car she had set her heart on disappeared because the procedural hold delayed the payment window. The demolition crew she had hired found themselves turned away by legal filings she hadn't noticed. She was fully exposed to the limits Andrew had foreseen, and each moment of confusion, each flustered call, was a small victory. What struck me most was how calm I felt, despite everything. I wasn't gloating, at least not in the way Bianca would have expected. I was simply bearing witness to the unfolding of justice, precise and measured, the result of foresight, not anger. For once, I didn't feel powerless. My patience, my silence, and my trust in Andrew's design allowed me to reclaim strength without confrontation. I remembered the nights Andrew spent teaching me the value of careful planning. Every late night, every line of code, every spreadsheet was part of a larger system. And now, those lessons were alive in action. I could see the contrast between his quiet intelligence and Bianca's reckless ambition play out in real time. Her mistakes weren't dramatic or sensational, they were inevitable, unfolding naturally from her choices, like dominoes falling one by one. There were moments when I almost smiled, seeing her scramble to adjust, realizing the limits of her control. She was still alive, still wealthy in appearance, but she had no true access to the fortune she thought she had. And I, who had felt erased and powerless just days before, could finally breathe, knowing that Andrew's system was working exactly as he had intended. Even in the midst of her unraveling, I felt compassion for her, not because she deserved it, but because I understood how greed and impatience can blind anyone, even someone who once seemed careful and controlled. It was a lesson I hoped she would carry, if not for herself, then as a testament to Andrew's vision and the values he had instilled in me. I realized that true strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it waits, patient and silent, letting time reveal what integrity can achieve. The day finally came when I walked into the lawyer's office wearing the navy suit Andrew had chosen for me years ago, the one he had picked for his wedding. I felt a calmness I hadn't experienced since the funeral. Sitting in the waiting room, I held a book in my lap, though I wasn't reading. My heart was steady, my mind focused. This was the moment when everything Andrew had prepared would reveal itself. Bianca entered shortly after, her confidence frayed. The polish she had carried so effortlessly days ago was gone. Her clothes looked tired, her hands shook slightly, and the sharp edges of her posture softened under the weight of mistakes she had never anticipated. I could see the realization starting to settle in. Her empire was crumbling in the quietest way possible, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The lawyer explained how Andrew had set the trust, how every asset, every account, every piece of property now transferred into the Andrew Carter Legacy Trust, with me as the sole trustee and administrator. The stipulations were clear. Bianca would receive only a monthly stipend contingent upon maintaining full-time employment and living modestly. The fortune she had flaunted was gone, replaced by the consequences of her choices. I felt a mix of relief, sorrow, and gratitude. Relief that the system had worked, sorrow for the rift that had never needed to exist, and gratitude for Andrew, whose foresight had protected not only the assets, but the values he held dear. His legacy was not just wealth, it was vision, integrity, and a belief that opportunity should be shared, that knowledge and care could shape lives. In the weeks that followed, I opened the Andrew Carter Tech Scholars Foundation in the very library Bianca had wanted to gut. The oak shelves still lined the walls, books mingling with whiteboards and laptops. Students' laughter filled the spaces, their curiosity and discovery a living testament to Andrew's vision. Each day I walked among them. I remembered him, the boy tinkering with computers in the basement, the young man pacing the kitchen with dreams larger than our home, and I understood that his dream had never truly ended. And Bianca. She lived quietly, humbly, in the life she had created for herself without the fortune. Justice had arrived not with anger, but with patience and purpose. Watching it unfold, I learned that integrity and quiet strength could outlast arrogance, and that the true inheritance is not money, it is the love, trust, and values that endure. And in this, I hope anyone listening remembers to protect your people, not just your property, and trust that sometimes the quietest lessons are the ones that matter most. Looking back now, I realize that the quiet moments, the ones where I felt powerless, erased, and forgotten, were the very moments that taught me the most. They taught me patience, the strength of observing before acting, and the power of trusting someone who believed in you deeply, even beyond life. Andrew had left me more than an inheritance of money. He left me an inheritance of trust, foresight, and purpose, and that is something no one can ever take away. Every morning, I walk through the library, watching students lean over laptops, their eyes alight with curiosity. I feel him there. I see his smile, his determination, and I know that his dream has taken root in these young minds. They are the living proof that legacy isn't about possession, it's about impact, about nurturing potential, and about protecting the values that matter most. I feel honored to carry this forward, and it reminds me that life's most profound victories often arrive quietly, without fanfare, through persistence and love. I also learned that integrity and patience can be more powerful than confrontation or anger. Bianca's downfall was not a spectacle. It was a consequence of choices made without foresight, exposed by the very system Andrew had entrusted to guide justice. Watching it unfold reinforced that true strength does not always roar, it waits, precise and deliberate, until it can be revealed fully. If there is one thing I hope you take from my story, it is to protect the people you love, to safeguard the values you hold dear, and to trust that preparation and foresight can overcome even the most audacious challenges. Life will test you, and sometimes it will feel unfair. But strength, patience, and love can quietly guide you to the resolution you hope for. I also hope that this story reminds you to cherish the relationships that matter, to invest in people, and to recognize that the real legacy we leave is not measured in dollars, but in the lives we touch and the lessons we pass on. If my story has touched you, inspired you, or reminded you of someone you care about, I invite you to like this video, share it with someone who might need encouragement, and leave a comment letting me know where you are watching from. Your voices, your experiences, and your reflections keep stories like this alive, and remind us all that even in quiet moments, extraordinary lessons are unfolding, and that, perhaps, is the greatest inheritance of all.